Welcome everybody to our third webinar in our three-part series of our whole school send, East of England and North East London region hosted Preparation for Adulthood webinar series. We are delighted today to welcome back Elaine Dale from ETF and Julie Pointer and her colleague Linda Jordan from NDTi, who are going to deliver our third part in our series today. There is the chat function there for you to comment in. Please be bold and brave and contribute, and please share your thoughts and opinions. This is a non-judgmental, safe session, and we'd really love to hear your feedback. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A section or in the chat if you prefer as you go. There's going to be quite a bit of interaction today, so we're really looking forward to our session. So with no further ado, could I please welcome Julie and Linda from NDTi, who are going to deliver our first section. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Michelle. Let me just put my slides up. Oh, where I want to be, apologies. Good start. Okay, lovely, thank you. Hopefully people can see my slides. It's saying I'm sharing. And welcome everyone to this afternoon session. It's the final session actually on our preparing for adulthood from the earliest years, I guess. And this is the final session where we're going to focus a little bit more on early years. So those of you who's joined the other sessions will know that we've kind of work backwards a little bit. Hopefully you'll find it really useful. My name is Julie Pointer and I work for the National Development Team for Inclusion. My background actually is, I'm a social worker by trade, so I qualified many years ago now and have worked in the world of sort of special educational needs, particularly in the world of transition for many years now. I head up the Children and Young People programme at NDTi, and we are probably best known for having the Preparing for Adulthood contract, which is funded by Department for Education, came about when the code changed, so Children and Families Act 2014, and we've been working on this programme since then. So what we plan to do this afternoon is kind of think a bit more about preparing for adulthood from the earliest years, have a look at the outcomes framework with a bit of a focus on early years, and then I've got couple of a really lovely video for you to watch, and then some effective practice that we filmed earlier in the year up in Wolverhampton. Linda, do you want to just say hi and introduce yourself before I move on?
Yeah, hello everybody. Can't see anybody, but it's great to be here. I'm Linda Jordan. I work with Julie at the NDTi, mainly on the Preparing for Adulthood programme and on other contracts as well. I'm a teacher by profession. I've been involved in SEN for 40 years. I was an assistant director of SEN. After I was a teacher, I've worked in mainstream and special schools, FE, and I also ran an early years service. So, and I've also actually got a daughter with special needs, so I've been through the system as a parent as well.
Brilliant, thanks Linda. And our plan this afternoon, we're going to present first of all and share a couple of videos, and then we're going to hand over to Elaine, who's going to pick up the baton. And we've got, as Michelle said, some interactive sessions too, but please keep those questions coming in. We've got quite a lot of time at the end of the Q&A, so we really welcome your thoughts and feedback as well. So I'm going to kick off. Yeah, just to kind of give people a reminder, really, again, just a bit of a refresher, I guess. So Preparing for Adulthood is a programme that we run based on the evidence of what works to support children and young people to have good lives, to move into adulthood with jobs, independence and good health. And I think what we've learned over the years through working on, through the work that we do on PFA and the work that we do outside of that as well, is that, you know, this absolutely needs to begin in the early years. This is when the foundations are laid for the rest of life. And I'm sure you'll all be familiar with that statement. We know that the kind of blueprint for young people is set very early on. So really important that we start having those kind of PFA conversations as early as possible. Yeah, so we're doing a tag team today.
Yeah, so Julie's just mentioned that we base our work on the evidence of what works. And this graphic, some of you may have seen it, but you'll certainly be aware that the preparing for adulthood pathways are writ large all the way through the Code of Practice. There's a chapter in the Code of Practice, chapter 8, which is called Preparing for Adulthood from the Earliest Years, but these pathways are mentioned in every chapter of the Code of Practice. And they are kind of one of the things that is very different about the 2014 legislation from what we had before, because in the 1981 Act legislation, there was a very, very little emphasis on outcomes or about life outcomes. It was very much about diagnosis and input. And we didn't think very much about what the outcomes for young people were going to be. So these pathways were co-produced with young people and families between 2008 and 2011. There was a cross-government programme called Getting a Life, and I had the privilege of working on it. It was, the main department was the Department of Health, but there was a working group across government, and they wanted to understand why young people with learning difficulties don't go into employment when they leave education. And so they asked us to work in a number of areas across the country. We worked in 6 initially, and that was expanded to 12 for the last year and a bit. So altogether, we worked with 400 young people, children and young people and their families, and the systems in the areas that they lived in. So it was a 3-year programme. It was intensive. We were privileged to have a lot of resources and a lot of capacity. And so we were able to work in depth with a large number of young people and their families. And what we were doing was finding out from them why they didn't feel that people went into employment. Very quickly, they said, we'd also like to think about the rest of our lives. So what about where we're going to live when we grow up? We want to talk about friends, big issue for young people, friends and relationships, and being included in their communities. And obviously everybody else thought, well, we can't do any of that if we're not healthy. And so these 4 pathways came out of that work. And if you think about it, they are kind of what make up our lives. And so with those young people and their families and everybody working in the system across education, health and care, we identified the barriers that young people, probably those young people with the most complex needs, but it does impact on other young people too. What are the barriers to going into employment, to being independent, being seen as an autonomous adult, being able to make your own choices and choices about where you live, who you live, about your lifestyle, etc. And friendships, as I said, came out as a really, really big issue. So people identified the barriers, and then probably for the last year, but a bit all the way through, we were helping people and they were helping us to think about what needs to happen instead of what we've been doing for the last 30 years. What do we need to do differently? What needs to change? And so we've got that whole body of evidence that came out of that work, but it was also it was in addition to research that had already happened with young people, and the conclusions were very similar, that basically they want ordinary lives. And Julie was involved in another concurrent programme called Aspirations for Life, which was really working in the early years and primary, thinking about what happens then for young disabled children that sort of prevents them ending up being able to be on these pathways in the way that everybody else is. So we have got a body of evidence around the sorts of things that work in order to support young people into employment, to have more independence and to have friends and be in their communities. And we will share a bit more about that, but it's really great evidence. And I think it was born out of those young people's experience. Some of them were young and were going through the school system. Some of them were older and were already at college or beyond college. And so we had a really rich group, and all of the young people had quite big labels. They either had learning disabilities or complex autism or profound learning needs. So it was quite interesting that young people with the most complex needs, actually, when we had that opportunity to work with them in depth and to use peer support from young people in local mainstream schools, etc., we really found out that they have the same aspirations and desires as everybody else.
And what's really interesting, actually, Linda, as you're talking, so the Aspirations for Life programme, one of our colleagues created some really lovely posters to showcase learning disabled young people in employment, and actually he's just updated those. I'll make sure I'll share the link for people. But what's lovely to see is that all of those young people who were part of the poster campaign are now adults, and they're all still working. So really kind of positive outcome for those young people.
Okay, so why the pathways are really important and why we find them really important in our work is they help us to think differently about young disabled people and young people with SEN, because traditionally, you know, we see them as different, and then the system responds to them in a different way to how it responds to other young people, and then therefore they get different outcomes, and as we know from all the research, much poorer outcomes. And so using the pathways help us to remember that children and young people who have got labels of special needs or disability actually have the same aspirations, needs and rights as all young people. And in fact, disabled young people have enhanced rights in a way, because they have, you know, they have got protected characteristics under the Equality Act, and also we have the human rights legislation, which means that they definitely do have the same rights as everybody else. So the pathways help us to remember what makes up all of our lives. You know, we're all on those pathways really when we're moving into adulthood, and then for the rest of our lives, you know, mostly we are, most of our life is constructed around those 4 pathways. So they help us to remember what is an ordinary life, what is a good life. And if we are planning with young people along those pathways, then we have to have different kind of conversations. And if we do have what we call person-centered conversations about ordinary life, then we are going to find out much more about young people's aspirations. It means that we have to work quite hard with some young people to find out what their aspirations are, if they're non-verbal or if they have really complex communication. But nevertheless, you know, we are now duty bound under law, and also it's the right thing to do, that we should be finding out what young people really want, what's important to them now and in the future. Once we know what their aspirations are, it's much easier to put the right support in. We need, you know, we're still kind of a bit still putting in provision that's a little bit sometimes one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And it's really important that we move towards putting in provision and support that is individualised and personalised. And then once we've got all of that in place, it's much easier to make sure that what goes on in the classroom and our education targets, as well as social care and health targets, are all linked up and are all working together to help the young person to achieve their outcomes.
The golden thread, as they call it.
Golden thread.
So I think it was in 2017 we actually spent a bit of time with the department creating what we called the Pfa Outcomes Framework. And we're just going to share with you now some of the elements that sit in that framework, but particularly in relation to early years. And the framework was put together to really support practitioners, families, parents, to kind of think about how we use a couple of phrases. One is about children, young people being as independent as they can be, bearing in mind that, you know, we rely on various elements of support in our lives. None of us are islands, none of us are completely independent. And I think the other phrase we use quite a lot is enough support. And I think, you know, often what we see, particularly within early years, is that children can be over supported or not necessarily have the right amount of support. It's really interesting. I'm supporting a friend of mine at the moment around an education, health and care plan for their child who's, I think she's quite little, she's 5. And this concept of TA is going to be the solution to everything, and trying to get people to think about, actually, how can we use the network that are ordinarily there? How can we use friends, the community to support children in a different way? So this just gives you a bit of a flavour around the 4 pathways. So you've got employment, friends, relationships, community, independent living, and good health, and just gives you some prompts to think about. I'm not going to go through them all, but, you know, for example, and you'll see later on when I share Hill Nursery story, you know, how they're using real world play, how they're allowing children, you know, under 5s in their care, even those who've got more complex needs or more additional needs, to use tools and have an opportunity to kind of do real life play. So, you know, working kitchens, DIY, etc. Playing with other children, really important that we support within the early years setting. You know, those friendships that often kind of grow with children and move into different stages of their lives can be set from early years. And also that is such a strong link into them being part of their community as well. So thinking about what children need to support and engage with children who might have additional needs, and kind of understand difference, and, you know, work with and feel comfortable around difference as well. So, you know, using examples like, you know, playing nurse and doctor, etc. It's a lovely picture there of a little lad. We did a session up in Newcastle, which was called What I Want to Be When I Grow Up, and this little lad, you can see, popped a policeman's helmet on and was kind of playing at being a police officer. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we can think about much earlier on to support children to be, as I said earlier, as independent as they can be as they move into their adult life. So, you know, around independent living, making choices is really important. What do we do for younger children around making choices? And that could be really simple things like, you know, do they choose between a orange squash and a lemon squash, for example? You know, so often I think we work with older children, particularly, you know, around year 9, as they move into that kind of year 9 review. I've had young people say to me, how can you expect me to make decisions about the rest of my life when I've not really been used to making decisions much earlier on? So really important that we start thinking very early on, what can we do to support children to be as independent as they can be as they move through those key stages and into their adult life. And also knowing what's ordinarily available. So Linda talked about kind of the human rights angle for children and young people. How do we tap into, you know, ordinarily available health provision, particularly ordinarily available community provision? What opportunities are there for children to be part of their community and to kind of grow and develop with their non-disabled peers? So I'm hoping this is going to work. Fingers crossed for this one. It's a really lovely little video that showcases a group of children talking about what they want to be when they grow up, and a really lovely kind of tool to use for, you know, when you're doing CPD with your team. So fingers.
Julie, just before you start it,
yeah,
there's a grey line across the PowerPoint, which presumably you can't see.
I can't see it, no.
But people are putting in the chat that there's a grey line across the top. So I have no idea why that is. And if anybody from Whole School Send has got any idea what we can do to solve that, I would be very welcome for their idea.
I've not seen that before. I don't know what.
Is it impeding people's ability to see things, do you think?
Only slightly.
I think it's only on a couple people's.
Okay.
I think we can continue as people
okay.
chat. I'm really sorry to say, with a couple of people who have got that in, obviously there will be a recording, we'll take a look at that.
Yeah,
and slides will come to you. So if you want to continue, Julie, that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
When I grow up, I want to be a builder.
When I grow up, I want to be a woodcarver.
I want to be king.
When I grow up, I want to be an Xbox game designer.
When I grow up, I want to work in a hotel.
When I grow up, I want to be a vet and look after dogs.
I want to be a racing driver.
When I grow up, I want to be a digger driver.
I want to be a professional shopper.
When I grow up, I want to be like Aunt and Dad.
I want to be a fashion model.
When I grow up, I want to be a vet and look after horses.
I want to be a chef and I want to make pizzas and curries for everyone.
When I grow up, I would like to work in the kennels or cattery. I want to be a theme park maker.
When I grow up, I want to work at McDonald's.
When I grow up, I want to be a scientist.
When I see that video, I always think those children look as if they're already in those roles. Can you imagine them?
It's really interesting, Linda, because I know I was talking earlier on about a plan that I'm supporting someone with at the moment, and actually the kind of aspiration, this is quite a little child, and the aspirations for the future has been left completely blank. And it just led me thinking, you know, we ask that question, don't we, all the time, and we're not expecting children to know. But we ask that question when children are little, you know, what would you like to be when you grow up? And it's so important that we do it for all children.
Yeah, and I think the evidence we found from not only the Getting a Life and Aspirations work, but also other research that's gone on, is that often doesn't happen for disabled children. So for those of you that have got the grey line across the screen, the green boxes at the top are just the Preparing for Adulthood pathway headings. So the first one's employment, and then friends, relationships, independent living and health. So it's those 4 headings. So this one, oh, there's now a new, I just got another grey book.
I was trying to get rid of it then. I thought I might be able to. Go on.
Anyway, so Julie shared with you the part of this tool, which is the 0 to 4. So this is the Key Stage 1-1. So it's really just to remind everybody that if we're working with children that have got special educational needs, particularly if they've got higher needs, it's just reminding us that we should be including in the same kind of activities that we include everybody else in. So, you know, in Key Stage 1, we're not thinking about employment as such, but we're making sure that all children have access to the kinds of activities and experiences that all children have, which build gradually into them thinking about employment. Julie's already mentioned, what do you want to be when you grow up? So you can see that friendship is mentioned on all of these slides, and that's because for young people themselves, and we certainly found in the Getting a Life programme that friendship was the biggest issue for them, that they hated social isolation, they hated not being able to go out with their friends and do the stuff that other people do. So it is there all the way through. I won't read them out, you'll get the slides, and the tool is available on our website as well if you wanted to use it later. And then we've got something similar, the Key Stage 2, again, you know, building on what's gone before, starting to think about talking to children about what happens when they get older in terms of employment, etc. Again, you know, this is a really important age for friendship, isn't it? This is when children are really, friendships are really important. They're starting to fall out with friends, and they're starting to identify best friends. And obviously some children get bullied. We know that there's a lot of evidence that children get bullied by other children. So it's really important that in every school we have a clear understanding of who's vulnerable to bullying, who are likely to bully, and make it clear at a very strategic level that we don't accept bullying. But you know, it does still seem to be a bit of an issue. So again, you know, you can look at that in your leisure. And then obviously we get into secondary, and again, lots of reminders of the sorts of things we should be doing to support children who have got disabilities and you know, complex special needs, that they should be doing all of these things that other children are doing. And in that final column there, you can see sex and relationships education. There's a lot going on on this at the moment. You're probably all involved in your schools on the new curriculum. It's really important that we differentiate it really well, a high quality differentiation, to make sure that every young person has access to that. I remember when we were working on the Getting a Life programme, in every area that we worked, young people spoke passionately about this, and this included children with very, very complex needs. And I remember people saying, people don't think that we're going to have boyfriends and girlfriends. People don't think that we want to have sex and relationships, get married and have children. But we have the same, you know, some of us do, some of us don't, some of us are gay, some of us, you know, and it was quite extraordinary to hear those things coming from groups of young people that traditionally we don't listen to well enough.
And I think, Linda, what we know with the work that we've done with adults with learning disabilities and autistic adults as well, you know, so that those kind of the lack of education and understanding can have such a long-term impact on their relationships as they move into their adult lives.
Yeah, again, in that final column, we've got the remembering about annual health checks. So if children have got severe learning disability or learning difficulty, or some children that have the label of moderate learning difficulty and so on, are entitled from the age of 14 to have an annual health check with their GP. And it's a really good idea if a child's got an education, health and care plan, to make sure at the Year 9 review that this is discussed, because it is a really important issue that those groups of children have, as they move into adulthood, there's a lot of evidence to show that we don't look after their health well enough. And so it's really important that they do get registered for an annual health check if they're entitled to. And then we've got the whole post-16, it gets more things on it as we get into the older age group. So this is really when we're really supporting young people into employment. And on the left there, we've got the various employment pathways. You know, for some young people, they're going to be going to college, hopefully accessing level 1 or above program. But for lots of young people, if that's not possible, we need to be thinking really hard about things like supported internships and micro enterprises for some, where they have their own small business. Yeah, I think that's probably enough. So this is post-19. So as you're aware, if somebody has an education, health and care plan, it is possible to stay in the education system until you're 25. We hope that for most young people, they'll be leaving before the age of 25 because they would have got a job, or their future is planned out and a good package is in place to support them into their adulthood, further into their adulthood. But, you know, some young people do need to stay in college longer than 19. And so this is just a whole load of things that we need to be thinking about. And Elaine obviously is in a college, and this is her bread and butter. And she'll probably be mentioning some of this when she speaks later.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So now I can't see what's on the top here. I've got that band too. But we wanted to just kind of share, really thinking about from the earliest years and what the key messages are for those of you that are working particularly with children from preschool as they move into school. So, thinking about disabled adults, providing inspiration and role models, and families needing to know what's positive and possible. We're doing a piece of work at the moment, actually, with NHS England, looking at thinking about some of the gaps within the health sector, particularly around care assistance, and how we might be able to use some of those positions to provide employment for young, learning disabled young people and adults, actually, and the impact that will then have on families. So imagine, for example, you're a parent who has had a child, you've had a birth and the child's got a disability, to actually be able to see disabled adults working in the hospital environment, and the impact that has from the very earliest years is really important. So we've talked about planning, intentionally planning from the early years. If we get that planning right from the start, it does support greater pathways. We've also mentioned education, health and care plans, including aspirations. So I often hear practitioners say, well, I've asked them what they want to be, and they want to be, I don't know, we had a scientist, didn't we? Or they want to go to the moon. And I think it's really important that we don't dampen down what young people tell us, what children and young people tell us, but actually use the opportunity to unpick, you know, what is that about? What is it about going to the moon that that child might be interested in doing? And how can we keep that dream alive as they move into their adult lives? We've already mentioned thinking about supporting social relationships, so friendships from the earliest years, circles of friends. You know, how can we ensure that children have friends from when they start preschool, you know, as they move into their kind of school years and into their adult life? Think about service land. Think beyond service land. We were having a conversation today, actually. We had a team meeting today. I think, certainly for me, when I think back to my days practicing as a social worker and working with families, I often, when I went to do an assessment visit, would have a kind of stock of services in my head. How can we think beyond service land? So how can we think about what's ordinarily available for everybody and ensure that children, young people and their families are able to tap into, with the right support and the right adjustments, what's there for everyone else? And I've already mentioned friendships, circles of friends. Again, you know, friends kind of runs quite a long way through our key messages, thinking about friendships for motivation and learning. I think it's really challenging if we are having children in education settings where, say, for example, you've got a group of children who don't use language, don't use spoken language to communicate. How can we ensure that they have the opportunity to have relationships with verbal children as well? Talked about using ordinary available resources to support friendships and community. Make sure the local offer is inclusive, so your local offer within your local area, and also your school offer too. Does that include children with additional needs as well? Support independence and having a voice from the earliest years. Again, going back to my scenario, you know, where often I think we start giving children independence and decision making from, you know, when they move into year 9 and beyond. It needs to happen much earlier on. Person-centered planning runs through everything that we talk about with the work that we do. We've got some fantastic tools on our website that are available for anyone to use to support children's voice at the heart of what you're doing. Just enough to support, I've kind of mentioned that already. How do we ensure that we don't over support children and young people, but we get the right support at the right time and the right amount of support as well? And then support for health that's delivered in a way that enhances independence and inclusion. I was having a conversation only this week actually with a health colleague in one of the local areas who's doing some work with her fellow health practitioners to try and get them to think a bit more creatively around how they support children and young people's health. So for example, a young person that might need to access physio, you know, what other opportunities are there? How can we use PE in school or, you know, community activities to support that child around their physio needs that goes beyond having, you know, kind of traditional physiotherapy? Are you there, Linda? Oh,
I was busy trying to put something in the chat.
Oh, no worries. I was just about to jump in then.
No, I was putting something in the chat and I was on, yeah, so I'll do that later. So yeah, this is, we're not going to bombard you with lots of different examples of outcomes that could be in an education, health and care plan, but we thought it was useful to just share one with you to give you the idea of the sorts of things that we mean when we talk about outcomes that are going to support young people's aspirations. So this is something that we would like to see in a you know, in a plan for a young child, and it is where social isolation can begin. So we often hear parents of very young children sort of being upset because their children don't get invited to birthday parties of the classmates and stuff like that. So it's really important that we address those kind of things. So under the friends, relationships and community inclusion pathway in the early years, we need to be thinking about all of those, as we just looked at on the outcomes framework. But when we're looking at actually individual children and setting outcomes, you know, if we feel that a child is likely to be socially isolated and the parents have expressed that they're a bit upset that they know that children are having time together outside of the nursery and they're not being included, this would be a really good outcome. So that, you know, by a date in the future, they would have been invited to birthday parties and to play with one of her friends after school. Now, this obviously needs work. You know, you don't just set an outcome and it happens. We have to think about the steps that would take us towards that outcome. And then obviously the provision. But in this case, you know, it's hard to be general because it depends on the school, it depends on the families, etc. But this would probably take somebody working in the school to perhaps talk to the parents of the other children, explain, you know, that they may be disabled, they may not yet be speaking or whatever, but it's really important that we include them. In my experience, that works. I've done that many times and people normally respond positively. Often what happens is people are a bit nervous, you know, without talking about it, they've made assumptions that perhaps his child wouldn't want to come, wouldn't be able to be there, you know, and a bit nervous to talk to the parents. So this is just making sure that we're doing everything we can along the road to prevent social isolation, which of course can lead to difficult behaviour. A lot of difficult behaviour that we experience is because children don't feel great about themselves, and that's often to do with their social relationships with either their friends or what goes on outside of school. So, you know, somebody's put in the chat about provision. If we're working along this kind of, with this kind of approach, what provision would you put in and how would it be paid for? It's quite difficult to answer that question because it's very much an individual situation. You know, you'd have to think about in each individual case, what support does this need? So this might only need something really small to happen. It may not even need to be provision. It may just need some conversations to go on between somebody working in the school or maybe between parents or whatever. But it might need a lot more than that. If a child's got very complex needs and there's all sorts of other issues, you might need to be doing some work in the classroom, and that would obviously be provision provided by maybe a teaching assistant and so on. So it's hard to give you a blanket answer, but I'm just looking. So Sarah has said this is a difficult outcome to achieve and it's reliant on other people. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the most important thing to say is that you never write an outcome that's not achievable, or, you know, you're 99% certain it's going to be achievable. So this would only be written if in this situation, this felt that it was achievable because somebody in the meeting would have said, you know, the parent probably, I mean, and I've been in situations a lot where this has happened. So the parent will say, I'm really upset. I feel that, you know, because she's different, other people are not inviting her to parties or whatever. And at this age particularly, you know, it's usually as simple as some conversations going on. It might need more than that, and as you say, you know, the alternative is to hold a party yourself. I mean, that can also be difficult because sometimes I've known that parents have done that and children don't come. So I think even in that situation, you still need to do some preparatory work that involves talking to parents. In the case of under fives, you know, we'd be talking about conversations with parents. As children get older, then it's conversations with those other children and young people as well. And we could talk a long time about setting up circles of friends and how that can work. But maybe that's for another time.
Thanks, Linda. I'm just going to try and see now if I'm mindful of time as well, if I can just get a bit of a clip of Low Hill Nursery. So bear with me, click into another screen. And I need to just scroll.
It did work when we tried it.
It did, yeah. Oh. There we go.
Julie, I don't think we can see anything.
Can you not?
It's not coming through, sadly, no.
Okay, all right. What I'm gonna do is I'll come out of one, and I don't know why that is. Let me go back into my main slides. I've only got a couple more. I'll make sure everyone's got the link. In fact, the others are just our useful links, so I'll come out. So Low Hill Nursery, we did one of our sort of outcomes framework workshops in the West Midlands earlier this year, and Low Hill Nursery are a fantastic nursery school who've got an outstanding grading by Ofsted, where they have really worked hard to think about their curriculum and how they use their curriculum to prepare children and young people for adult life. So from, you know, very little, very young, preschool, nursery age, using the environment, using their kind of the way they teach the children, encouraging independence, etc., etc. So I'll make sure you've got a copy of that video. Apologies that didn't work. Like Elaine said, it worked earlier on. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is probably have a look at the chat. I'm going to now hand over to Elaine, who's going to pick up the baton and carry on sharing her experiences from where she is.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Julie and Linda. I am just going to share my screen, if that's okay, everyone. Let me see if I can move that bar down to the bottom, so hopefully that will help. Is everyone okay and can see okay? Okay, so my name is Elaine Dale. I'm from City College Norwich. We're going to be talking about preparing for adulthood and just picking up, as Julie just said a moment ago, about high aspirations through early years. I have a very helpful viewpoint. I'm hoping that you'll think today, because whilst I work in an FE setting, I have 3 hats that I'm going to bring here today, so I hope you're going to find that's useful. You can give me feedback if you don't think that's the case. But I manage the early years nursery at the college, so I've got a perspective on that, and when we're thinking about preparation for adulthood and our work around that. I also have responsibility for cross-college special educational needs. So I have a really strong focus when I'm thinking about that on preparing for adulthood, and how that interactions from early years all the way through to FE, as well as the SEN Centres for Excellence through the Education Training Foundation. So I've just got a viewpoint on a few things here. So today we're just going to have a look at this afternoon on ETF, the Centres for Excellence. I'm going to look at preparation for adulthood and looking at our early years practice. I do want to talk to you about, and we're going to go into Slido poll, because I want your views on the graduated approach for minimum standards of support, but I want to just share our approaches. We're also looking at the SEN Code of Practice. It's review time. We know that we're expecting that any time, and we know there's a green paper, so I want to take your views on that. And when we're thinking about all the themes that are coming out about how we can work effectively together, when we're thinking about early years, when we're thinking about going through the school and all practitioners working together right through to FE, and then a little bit about how you can join us with the communities of practice in SEN. Here are a couple of links, and you'll get my presentation afterwards, so you can go on our page. The Education Training Foundation, like Nathan, has loads of resources. There's lots of webinars coming up, so do take an opportunity. It's funded by the Department for Education, so it's all funded through them, so there's no cost to you at the moment. We have 3 colleges involved currently, and we have Western focusing on staff training and development within the FE sector. And we've got Derby focusing on curriculum, and myself focusing on community, where we're looking at those outcomes and supporting our young people into employment, supporting our employers, and supporting our parent carers with support around community. When I'm thinking about preparation for adulthood, and I'm thinking about the earliest years within the nursery setting, we have a really strong focus on this, whether a young person has special educational needs or not. We work from within our setting. It's a small nursery setting, so probably a bit different to some of the people on the call today, but we do have 3 different age groups that we work with, and we're looking at those development stage of those areas that I've just highlighted there, following through to any concerns that we might be aware of when we're thinking about a needs assessment and additional support that we might want to consider. But all of the time we're thinking about actually how does that link into our Pfa outcomes. And I think, you know, when Linda was talking a moment ago, and Julie, about actually being part of their community, birthday parties is one of the key points. And I noted that somebody noted that in the chat a little while ago about how the approach to that, being as independent as possible, thinking about them keeping healthy. And we are thinking about what they want to do when they grow up, and thinking about what are their interests, because that's the key part. And I'll come on to that in just a moment. So what, I'm not going to preach to the converted, because you know all of this, but when, you know, we're thinking about it in our setting here, and the framework, and we work to that in the EF actually states that children, we need to think about their starting points and their future successes really early on. And then I put my FE hat on and thinking, actually, the earlier on that they start, and starting to think about all of their interests to prepare them for a successful future, gives them the best possible start, doesn't it? And thinking about their next steps. So that's what the EF says when we're thinking about that, to enhance the experience and the opportunities. And we know within our setting that our children have different experiences, and they come from different backgrounds and interactions, and how they interact with each other. And it's really interesting, because it's not normally the children that have those barriers. They're very engaging, and will just take each other at face value. And sometimes it's about actually the parents with those differences, and thinking about what the barriers might be. But for young children, it's actually they're my friends, and I really like them, and that's it when you're thinking about their community and their friendship groups. So we now, within our setting at the college, within the nursery, it's about the children's experience. We like to think about their experience within the awe and wonder of the world and which they live in, and that's directly taken from the IF, and these are words and things that you will know as well. And we recognise that our children all learn at different rates, and do need different types of support, and I'll come on to that in just a moment. But we pride ourselves on our skilled staff, as you will do, about recognising if there's any concern within the child's development, and we work alongside the parent carers for the best interest of the child, just to make sure that we've got that wraparound thought and care. So we've got the 3 I's, but I just want to move on about the next part of where we're thinking about we treat each child as an individual. Through my SEND Centres for Excellence, we don't think about special educational needs. We talk about inclusion. We talk about actually what adjustments do we need to make for the individual. So we're always talking about individual needs for all of our children, all of our young people, and our young adults. So that's our sort of the language that we use within our provision and within the nursery. When we're looking at treating everyone as an individual and every child with their own interest. Our provision that we set it up to spark interest. We look at in the moment type of planning, because it's child that initiates the interest and the learning that takes that's taken forward, and staff create meaningful teachable moments, and ask those open-ended questions. So that's our sort of culture, and that'll be things that you will be very familiar with, I know. What we do very early on is that we focus on the 7 areas of learning when we're thinking about all of our children, and we're thinking about that, and really that really helps with the Pfa and thinking about that. And my nursery managers tell me that, you know, whilst they do the initial assessment and the diagnostics, it's not about the paperwork, Elaine, and it's actually about just that learning journey. And all of those interactions with the child, but obviously keeping that at the heart. But that's something that they're aware of with the 7 areas of learning. And I just wanted to highlight our practice, and I'm sure you have the same type of thing in place. I'm going to move on and move just slightly on from the early years, and just talk a little bit about our support approaches that we have within the college as a whole, within the college nursery, and within our setting within the FE sector. I'm going to run through a couple of slides, but I'm giving you this question in advance, just because I want us to think about a graduated approach to support. What might that be? What do you do as practitioners? So if you can just take your phones, if not, if you can just go on and take, just if you open up your camera and just take up the QR, take up the code. Got them tongue tied today, and that will come up, and there's a question in just a moment that I'd like you to complete, and if you're able to answer that straight away, then please do. If you haven't got a phone to be able to do that, you can go on the internet and put in slido.com with the hashtag, those numbers there. So that's the question that I'm going to pose to you. I'm really interested in your what approach to a graduated support approach do you take? This is something that, and part of my work through Education Training Foundation, I'm in a very privileged position where we're talking to the Department for Education, or actually, if I'm really honest, they're talking to us about actually what's the approach, because they're thinking about what needs to be in place for the SEND Code of Practice. So if we take your views, and we will take those back back to the Department for Education about saying, well, this is the norm, this is the practice that we see, it will really be very helpful and inform our practice. But for us, when we're thinking about a graduated approach, and this is within the within our nursery, and I expect you'll have the same approach within your setting, and we most definitely have this within the FE setting as well, where we have, when we're thinking about inclusion, when we're thinking about all children, all young people, all students, where we have the expectation, and when we're thinking about certain things that need to be in place. Then there is approach to that some children might need a little bit extra when we think about tailored support, when we're thinking about they need a greater stretch, need a little bit more support in there. And then a few of our children and young people needed additional support around the teaching assistant, a learning support assistant, out of class, in class interventions, and might have one-to-one and things like that. So that's our sort of graduated approach, where we just think about inclusion needs. Everyone should have a tailored approach, adaptive teaching. Then there's the some, and then there's the few. And I'm hoping I've got some positives from that from you that are on the call today, and that you recognise and think that actually that's something that we recognise and that's our approach at all. But when we're thinking about the minimum standards, these are the questions that Department for Education pose to us to deliver the minimum standards of support provided by learners with SEND. And I'm using learners as a caveat for all children and young people. What levels of support would be needed for this to be successful? What solution and enablers from the SEND view would need to be considered to make this work for everyone? What's reasonable for any setting, and what's reasonable for your setting? We know that that we're challenged with funding, and workload can be significantly challenged, and partners are fulfilling their duties within the Zen Code of Practice, and they're actually looking at, well, I will do the musts, but there's real challenges on the shoulds. So it'd be really interesting. I'm going to come on to the Zen Code of Practice in just a moment, just for your views and thoughts on that. And would it be better if settings were more expert in identifying support needs early? Do you feel that you're able to do that, so that your children and young people didn't require an education, health and care plan? Or are education, health and care plans essential when we're thinking about, is it for the some or is it for the few, rather than from the all? And I know from our parent carer community that they feel that the EHCP is the answer and that has to be in place. But when we're thinking about that graduated approach, I just wonder about actually what your views are on that within the setting. So I hope I've just stimulated some thought for some action. So here's the question, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing and just go over to people have actually put some stuff in already. So I'm just going to share the screen. I'm just going to come over to here already to share this part and come here. And hopefully in a moment, you'll see what's coming through. Can everyone see that? Or somebody can just tell me that that's coming through?
Yeah, I can see 3 of them.
Lovely, thank you.
Last one.
Should be needs-led, personalised for each child or young person, inclusive practice and teaching adapted to suit needs. Absolutely unique to each child, great, absolutely lovely. Should be reasonable to the individual on the basis of the start of the conversation and appropriate for them and their needs and their wishes and dreams. This is wonderful, everyone. Flexible and individualised. Assess, plan, do, review cycle. Absolutely. Someone's quoting the Zen Code of Practice, but you're absolutely right to do that. It's getting harder as agencies have longer waiting lists. This is true. Lots of short actions with regular reviews of process rather than long-term actions. Absolutely, and I think it's something that you could have with an EHCP or without. So that's really helpful, and I will take these back. They're really fantastic. Thank you, everyone. That will remain open. So if you've got any other further views on that, we'll just take that forward. So that's wonderful. I'm just going to stop sharing and then go back to my presentation, if I may. So be flipping backwards and forwards a couple of times, if that's okay. So that's wonderful. Thank you. So when I'm thinking about actually our local authority, we're within Norfolk, we have a written statement of action. And for those of you that within our county, you will know what that feels like. But many of the providers have a written statement of action, and there's some real challenges with that. But I would say our local authority is working really hard on improvements within when we're thinking about special educational needs. However, would like to just pick up this part, which is an absolute must when you're looking at a toolkit for SEND and disability within early years, and when you're thinking about actually when you're raising concerns. And I don't want to preach to the converted if you're all practitioners and you're thinking, actually, I do know about SEND, but if not, there's a great toolkit there when you want to raise those first concerns and when you're thinking about that. So it's a process to follow and things that you might want to consider, and there's a link there to take you through. But so that's for the Council of Disabled Children, if you don't know about that already. For us, when I mentioned about our local authority, we are getting a really good pace on in our written statement of action, and lots of work taking some great pace. We have provision we expect to be in place, and we have what we call the Ps, provision expected at SEND support. And then actually, around the same code of practice and getting support and some advice and guidance there. So a couple of links there. And I'm involved with the Parent Carer Forum Family Voice within Norfolk. And those of you from this county will know about that. And each county has their own family representatives, don't they? And we've created a guide for parents to support them about things to think about when you're thinking about preparation for adulthood, that pathway plan, when to start thinking about the next steps, and thinking about coming into college and thinking about planning. So we've prepared that, and that's on our website if you wanted to take a look at that. But I'm sure you have things in place within your local community. So now I'm going to move on and just think about, as I mentioned a little while ago, about the SEND Code of Practice. We know that this is a time to review. We did expect everyone, I know, didn't we? We were thinking about, oh, that's going to be out in September. There's been some delays within the SEND division in actually getting that together. There was a recent press release, I think just this last week, saying actually we need a working party. So there are some senior leaders actually focusing on this. We now know that there's going to be a green paper in January, and within my ETF position, we're talking to the SEND division, and they're very interested in our views around the SEND Code of Practice. So there are some things that they're raising, and some things that I think will resonate with yourselves, which I'm going to come on to in just a moment. But this is the next Slido question that I'm going to be posing to you, so I'm giving it you in advance. You can go on there now and add your thoughts, but I just wanted to just talk about what we know that's coming up. That too often current systems deliver poor outcomes. We just know that you know, we're really challenged, and when we see that, and a poor experience of getting and offering help and support, we're not preparing our children and young people we send for adulthood well. You know, some of the things that we've spoken about today and the things that we need to consider, and that's something that I think we all recognise that we need to work harder at. Mainstream schools and further education colleges are unable to access the raw resources to meet the needs quickly, meaning that issues escalate really quickly and becoming more expensive in the long run. And for us, when we're looking at high needs, which is the pot of funding that we access when we come into FE, that's growing fast, and that's because we haven't met needs early on, and we're not trying to we haven't looked at interventions early on about making our children as independent as possible with those with that early work. Some of the things that we're saying it's the right time to review because there's too little too late in developing the skills, independence and pathway plan for our children and young people, and that's fragmented even with an education, health and care plan. So, you know, with those children and young people without a plan, that's a real challenge. And there's some other bits in there around it's a very FE focus, which I won't dwell on too much, but transition between stages and next steps is really difficult when we're thinking about each of our settings. Is difficult for our children, and that, you know, when we're thinking about developing those skills and that Pfa, when we're thinking about preparation for adulthood. 6 principles that we think's on the agenda, but we'll see what the green paper comes up with. And you may have seen some of these slides if you were on the last call, but it's good for us to think about these. So still we're thinking about actually putting children and young people at the heart of the SEND system. We need to identify those needs early on, and that's, you know, why we're all here today. A strong, clear expectation in schools and colleges with high aspirations for our children. So, you know, when Julie was talking earlier on about somebody wants to be an astronaut or go to the moon, then actually just to unpack that and what does that mean about having those high aspirations? What is it that we want for our children? And for me, you know, I've got great focus on our learners gaining work. Last year we had special educational needs. Those were quite significant needs gaining employment last year. And that's not within the supported interns, that's outside of that, so quite significant needs. So having those high aspirations, going off to university, that real stretch and challenge is really important. A fairer, faster EHCP process, that has to be in the SEND code of practice, doesn't it, under the review? I think we're all worn out with the process of that, and that's what we hear parents, carers are actually saying. Something around the specialist provision, but a big focus on point 6 about the focus on preparing for adulthood through every stage. That's why I've highlighted that today in gold, of course. So what we want is actually just thinking about, you know, getting the right support, the earliest opportunity, so our children and young people can live healthy and fulfilled lives. Should put in the word, you know, just normal lives, just so that they can just access everything that everyone else can. And a couple of other thoughts in there about an outcomes framework that's actually fit for purpose. So what the vision means in practice, I'm not going to read this, there's quite a lot here, but actually we know about the early identification for special educational needs. I like to think about our inclusive practice and actually that graduated approach and things that we're putting in place. And a couple of other points in there when we're looking at the types of support, the EHCP process, and when we're looking at the SEND provision and the preparation for adult framework. So don't want to just spend too much time on that because I think I've highlighted enough around that. What I would like to do is just to highlight, I think there's some couple of press coverings recently. There was something in FE Week which I haven't shared, I don't think, in here because it's just around when we're thinking about school. But there was a recent press coverage within Schools Week, if you haven't seen this, about more councils failing. We know with the written statement of actions, youngsters waiting for early years, and a couple of other headlines there. So you've probably seen that, but it doesn't read well. And so there's some things that actually it's not working and things that we need to consider, even though we're working really hard as practitioners, aren't we? It's just, what do we need to do to improve? So here you are. When I'm thinking about what's non-negotiable and needs to be in the SEND code of practice, in that review, what do you want to see in that green paper, everyone? Let's do some hard hitting stuff here and let's hear your views so we can take that back to the Department for Education. I'm just going to stop sharing, pick up that bit here, move on to the next one and start sharing again. Hopefully you'll pick up that now. So have you all got what's non-negotiable needs to feature in the SEND code of practice review on your screen?
Yeah, Elaine.
Pardon?
I was just saying yes.
Oh, thank you. Has anyone got any views on that? Because at the moment we haven't got anything in here and it'd be really great. Perhaps it's just taken a little while to come through. If not, just pop it in the chat and we'll make sure that we capture that to take that through. Haven't got any support for inclusion. Thank you for adding that. Accountability for all involved, absolutely. And that's sometimes a real frustration and challenge, isn't it? When we think about education, there's a health and a care within that, and that everyone's involved in that. And when we're thinking about us as practitioners working closely together, smooth the transition, especially to move into college and post 16. Often the same support isn't available of college and they drop out. That's really interesting, isn't it? And I'll take that away because actually we feel within our college quite fortunate that we're able to put the support in place. And so I don't know if someone can just expand on that comment and just to tell me what setting you're at, if you're in primary, junior or secondary. That'd be really helpful. The rights of the child and young person is to be key part of the decision-making process, but the process has to be easy and fair for all to be fully funded. Absolutely. These are great, thank you. SENCO time protected, yeah, and in college we don't have a SENCO, we have a SEND department. But when we're talking about the SEND code of practice, it's very Senko orientated and talks about schools and not us as a whole. And so when we're thinking about everyone working effectively together, it needs to bring in all language and all practitioners, doesn't it? Greater emphasis on the graduated response. Too much emphasis is on EHCPs. Time consuming and often not timely. That's great, thank you. The need for smoother transition, especially to move into post-16. Oh, so I'm a virtual school, so support pupils from all ages. Thank you for adding that extra comment. Often the issue is the greatest pupils for SEND, not with an EHCP plan. Thank you for adding that. That's really helpful. And I think that's one of the other parts, isn't it, that's within the code of practice, that there might be musts, but when we're thinking about the shoulds, and there's a bit of a postcode lottery, isn't there, around, you know, if you're in Norfolk and you're able to come to our college, we support without a plan because it's actually person first, paperwork second, funding the third. You know, we take that approach first, but that's a postcode lottery because that might not be the same elsewhere. Careers advice for all, absolutely, and we've got great systems in place when we're thinking about careers advice, but how is that utilised when we're thinking about that? That's fabulous. Thank you very much, everyone. Do keep adding. I'm going to stop sharing and come back to my presentation if you feel that there's anything else you wanted to add. Go back to here. So some of the feedback that I've had, because this is my next question that I'm going to move on to in just a moment. How might we work better together? So when we're thinking about each of the settings, when we're thinking about each stage for a young person, and when we're thinking about all professionals, when we're thinking about parent carers, when we're thinking about employers, when we're thinking about everyone actually, how might we work better together? And at our last webinar session, I posed this question, and these are some of I've just got a couple of slides to share with you, and then I'm going to pose the question to you. So how might we work better together? So some really nice thoughts around that. You just have a look and think, oh, that really resonates with me, that point there. I've highlighted a few stars because I think it really fits in nicely today when we're thinking about some of the things that we've been sharing today. And then again on the next page, these were some of the other points. There were quite a few comments that were shared, but you can just see when we're thinking about working better together. So now it's over to you. How might we work better together? I'll do my stop sharing again. I'm onto my screen share onto this one. Go over to my final poll. You'll be pleased to know, and just wait for that to come up, because I think that takes a few minutes to come through, although I've started to share. So how might we work better together? There's lots of thoughts about if we had early planning, early intervention, then we've got that information early on, haven't we? And we're able to know about what we're sharing and how to share and who with. So early intervention is really key on this. I think it just takes a little while to come through because I know you're probably all beavering away and wanting to add your comments, or already starting to add your comments. Let's refresh the page. Yes, there you are. Multi-agency meeting, a transition and transition points are a must. Schools and colleges should mandate to share vocational profiles. Absolutely. And wouldn't it be great when you're thinking about the child's interest to have vocational profiles at the earliest of years? Something that we advocate really strongly at the college, and that we talk about vocational profiles very early on.
Elaine, just to say, we can't see the Slido now.
Oh, can't you?
No.
Thank you. Hang on a moment, everyone.
No worries.
Tell me if you can see that in just a moment.
Yeah, got it now.
Thank you. Ensure that everyone, school, home and the wider team are aware of the needs that start early and what this would look like and how these steps to build to more independent adults at the end. Absolutely. Better communication, national policies, not conflicting with exam results versus inclusion. I can feel your pain because there is some real challenges there, isn't there, with national policies and one doesn't talk to the other, or the code of practice doesn't talk to talk funding, and so there's real challenges around that. I do understand what you mean by that. It's a real challenge. Multi-agency meetings and transition points are a must. That was the point I raised a little while ago, and colleges should mandate the vocational profiles. Wonderful. We've just got a few comments there. Time to invest in open and honest conversations with the young person at the centre. And to do that at the earliest point, and and I've spoken here today about early years when I'm talking about nursery, but when you're able to start conversations with the young person about their next steps, that's great. Always ask the question, what's next? Fabulous, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing that, come back to my presentation if I may. Bit of jumping around here. It's the beauty of having two screens. Let's move on. So thank you for your input there, and I hope I haven't preached to the converted at all, and I hope just it's been helpful with my 3 hats on today. If you want to see the feedback, I can share this with colleagues at NASON, so you've actually got that in a wider forum. I can share that with you once we share the slides. But for now, I just wanted to talk about actually working and joining our communities of practice. You're all very heavily involved in NASON with all of the resources. You can also join us as well through the communities of practice. And so what we're trying to do is just to jointly together with NASON is to improve the experience of the SEND learner, and we do that by sharing our best practice. We also have a leadership offer as well, where our principals talk to other leaders about actually our step change to inclusion, and we like to think about inclusion rather than thinking about special educational needs. We've got a few webinars that's coming up here, so you can just dip into those, and just a couple of things that might be of interest to you, all funded by the Department for Education, so that's great for us. And that's it for me. You can contact me through that point there through the email, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was great. And thank you also again to Julie and Linda. A very informative session this afternoon, lots to think about. And, but I think, in my own roles, my school-based role, talking to settings, we really need to be thinking about, at whatever point in their education, but equally from those earliest years, thinking about how are we really truly preparing our children and young people for adulthood. And I will, in support of everything that all 3 ladies have said today, really want to maybe encourage you to look at the preparation for adulthood outcomes, across the 4 areas, and how are we, especially in our mainstream settings, and I know time's pressured, and I know we've got so much to deal with, but how are we really making sure that we are providing opportunities for not just our learners with SEND, but for all of our children to meet those outcomes in terms of preparation for adulthood. It's quite challenging, within the EHCP process, really, it's not really kind of, formalized until year 9, but, as you've heard today, that is way too late. And actually our children and young people need us to do this for them earlier, because, I'm a very firm believer in that. Yes, academic outcomes are important, but there's no point having GCSEs and qualifications if you haven't got the skills to go out there and access your community in all of those different areas. So we've got just a couple of questions, only one or two, because I think that people have been answering them as they've been popped in. So thank you very much for that. Just one towards, but it's probably actually quite useful for you both sets of speakers. Where on your website can the PFA resources be found specifically? So that goes to Julie.
Hi, Michelle. I think I've put quite a few links in the chat as we've gone along. So all of our resources are at www.preparingforadulthood.org.uk, and they're all kind of linked under the 4. So there's an employment tab, a community tab, an independent living, and a health tab. But if there are any problems finding anything, our details are in the slide, so drop us an email and we'll always help you navigate.
Great, thanks. And Elaine, did you want to answer the same? I know you mentioned it in your slides just recently, but I can see you've popped something in the chat.
Yeah, I've just popped the excellent gateway in the chat for you. That's obviously the main page, and there's loads of resources and things in there that you can just follow your nose and you can get to where you need to be with resources.
Great, thank you. And also just a request for the webinar link as well, or is that again, Elaine, on the page that you've just mentioned there? People are really interested, you know, and for me particularly in my school role, you know, particularly those that send CPD programs and pathways for our senior leaders, you know, our leaders within our schools. I think that's really valuable, Elaine.
So there's a couple of things in there. So the link that I've just shared with you a moment ago takes you to the main page. You'll be able to see on that main page lots of webinars that's coming up. So you'll be able to just book onto those really quite easily. If you're thinking about actually joining the communities practice, that's how you do it, and just you can dip in as much as you like. If you're thinking about from a leadership point of view and you want to get in touch with us, then you can do that through an email, which I'll just pop in the chat as well, if that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Elaine. There was just one more question. It was during Linda and Julie's session, just asking which aspects of the support that you discussed would a provision need pay for?
I tried to address that earlier. I'm not entirely clear because I don't know whether this person means paying us or paying provision in an EHC plan.
Okay.
I'm assuming the latter, and I think what I said to that was, you know, we're not on statements anymore. EHC plans are meant to be much more personalised and individualised. So what provision is going to be provided that is going to be needed to be paid for on top of what's ordinarily available or what's going to happen in the community will be different for each child. I mean, we could give examples, obviously. I tried to give the example of the birthday party that may not need any paid provision, but it may need some activity to go on in school. It may, you know, I'm thinking of another example of a young man I worked with where before we could even think about friendships outside of school, we needed to do close observations in school around his interactions, to just be thinking about which other young people he may have some kind of relationship with. The assumption at the beginning was he has no relationship with any other children, he has no interaction with any other children, but that needed some close observation to check out if that was the case, you know. So for him, there was some provision that, if you like, was paid for because a TA or a teacher or someone else might be doing that observation, but it would be something different for somebody else. So
thank you. Becky, you asked the question, to just pop it back in. Thanks, Becky. Saying you talked about going out to work, out to support provision/work with young people individually. Is this something provisions would be able to purchase if they thought it's supportive? Does that make sense to you, Linda and Julie?
Sorry, is it in the chat?
Yeah, it's just Becky's just popped it up.
Ah, okay.
If you've got any
going out to support provisions work with young people individually, is something. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the age, but we would expect ideally, Elaine talked about vocational profiling. We promote that vocational profiling should happen in the early stages of Key Stage 4, you know, ideally in year 10, so that work experience can happen in year 11. Because then we want the study programme post 16 to be based on at least some level of experience of employment. So how that is going to happen is going to vary. So some schools have quite advanced work experience programmes, and it would be, the provision would be what's normally available. In other schools, if a child's got an EHC plan, the support they get around the EHC plan would support them into their work experience. So again, you know, we're talking about things being personalised, individualised. So it's hard to give a blanket answer, but most of the things we've talked about are either going to be provided in what's normally available in a provision or through an EHC plan, or in the community through maybe other support.
Thanks, Linda. I think Becky's going to contact you personally to discuss that. Elaine, did you want to add to that? Or?
I was going to say, Becky, if you wanted to get in touch with either of us, because it's probably something just to take offline. But I think for us, when we're looking about, and I'm trying to ascertain the question and what you try to establish what you mean. For us, we have job coaches within the community to be able to help young people with work, but we use that through either access to work or support through our high needs funding. But it's probably best to get in touch, Becky, if we haven't actually understood you correctly.
Thank you. I've got one more question. Just a comment around, we are getting more parents, both primary and secondary, so across all the phases, asking about increased access to the community for their child, and staff in schools are finding it difficult to advise. So the local offer is meant to support with this, but not always great for families. Any advice?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I would absolutely echo that. The local offer hasn't really come to fruition in the way that I think it was hoped when the code first came about. But I think I think it's Sarah or Sarah, it has to start with planning, really, person-centered planning. So get families to really think about what that child, young person is interested in and what they want to do, and give them a bit of a task as well to look and see what's available ordinarily locally. I think if you're starting with the child in a person-centered way, then that should help you to think about what's already there in the local offer. And we've got a fantastic Peter Bates, one of our associates who does a lot of work around community, and he would always say, you know, look and see what's out there, ask questions, go on Facebook community hubs, use other parents, use your natural resources that are there to find out what's out there, you know, for other people, other families.
And if I can add, this is really linked to what we were saying earlier about friendship. So for most children, you know, the majority of children, they start their accessing the community, you know, without support when they're about 13, don't they? They start hanging out with their mates, they go shopping on Saturday, maybe they go to the cinema or whatever. And it's that friendship group that they support each other to access the community. So one of the problems for children with special educational needs, obviously they don't have that friendship group. So that really reinforces why it's really important that we do that from the very earliest years, because we learn to be in social groups really when we're very, very young. You know, nursery children are learning about social relationships. It's mainly what goes on in a nursery. They're learning how to be together, how to work, you know, on their own, in pairs, in groups. So those experiences are essential for children with additional needs, because they often get left out of forming friendships that then go with them throughout their lives.
And if I could just echo Linda, like for me in our provision here in my, you know, very small setting, that actually that is the focus, you know, the focus, whether, you know, I know we want them to do activities, I know we want to move them forward academically or in any area, but actually the focus needs to be on those skills around groups and being able to work with each other slowly but surely. There is a couple of more questions that are popping up as we go, but I'm conscious of the time, and just want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers, to Elaine, to Julie, and to Linda, because it's been a really, really informative session, and also it's been a great opportunity for you all to give your feedback, though, because that will go back. It's really important, that our opinions are collated from us that are on the ground doing that work every day. So thank you for providing that opportunity today as well, team. So great. If you've got any other questions that you kind of think of, as the more we talk, the more kind of pops up, please do feel free to get in touch with Whole School SEND, myself, Rebecca, or Heber, and also with our speakers today, Elaine, Julie and Linda, because I know they'll only be too happy to help you. So thank you all once again. Thank you for being here across the 3 webinars if you have been. I know it's tricky, especially, I don't know about your setting, but things have been like an extra notch this term. So it's been really fantastic to have you all here. Again, do think about if you need to share this with your school teams or your setting teams. Use these recordings of these webinars as a tool to do that. You can, they can watch a little bit and then you can press pause and you can then have those discussions as a school team. So, remember that the Whole School SEND webinar series from across all of the subjects are here for you to utilise as you see fit. So thank you, everybody. And thank you to Jenny as well for our Whole School SEND technical support today. It was really useful. Thank you to Rebecca, part of the team. And again to Elaine, Julie and Linda. And we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully soon. Just a little heads up that our next webinar series that our region is delivering is aimed at early career teachers, but also our NQTs +1, 2, 3 and 4. So if you're involved in that, do keep your eyes open to get your early career teachers, or if you're an early career teacher yourself, book yourself onto some fantastic training coming in January. So keep your eyes open for that. So thanks once again, everybody, and take care. We look forward to seeing you soon. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.